Today, my guest is Dan Moore. Dan is the CEO and product lead at Vaporware, helping innovative leaders disrupt industries, modernize services, and streamline their businesses. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Dan about how custom technology helps service companies scale. First, a quick reminder, if you like the show, CREPN Radio, please let us know. You can like, you can share, you can subscribe. And as always, you can leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, and that's Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Dan. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us today. Before we get into our topic, if you could take a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I am a trained computer scientist. So I went to Georgia Tech a long time ago and have been programming since I was young, probably 8 or so, been working on computers. My mom got me into that and just kind of surrounded me with technology. And I always was fascinated with like tearing them apart and putting them back together. And sometimes and didn't always get them back together successfully. So ever since college and my professional career in worked for Cisco Systems, a networking company, and working on large data centers and in the service providing space for managed service providers. I wanted to get closer to the problem and real value in the world, because it seemed like a lot of that technology was just super far away and abstracted from everyday people's lives and value that they see and change in the world around them. So I evolved and created this consulting startup that really helped people with ideas turn them into working real products that they can use and own from a software perspective. So we just focus on software applications, and I'm more of the product side of that. So if you're not familiar with that, there's software development, software design, and like how does it look and feel. And then there's the business side of that, where there's the viability, how do you sell and market software. And I'm kind of sitting in the middle of all three of those. So I need to in my everyday role, I'm focused on bringing in like the viability of the software, the feasibility of the development of the software, and the usability of the design. And I'm not really an expert in any one of those. I help them find like these serendipitous points of inflection where it's bringing a large return on investment when you're building software. So that's what I do personally on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you kind of sharing the triangle there of the different pieces when trying to develop a new product. I in my mind, I've created a million solutions for problems nobody else had but me. So clearly not a viable solution, at least not to take to market kind of thing. And just kind of wearing, and then also being aware of the interface, I think, or the design, and that it works, kind of thing. That's it's all critical, and I think anybody that's ever tried to bring something to market can fully appreciate what you were saying there. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's kind of start from I guess more of I'll ask a question, just custom software, from a, and I say custom software, it's not necessarily just custom software, but custom technology. Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of something that you guys have worked with that is a real estate oriented project that the Vaporware has worked on?
Yeah, great question. There's a local company in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm located, called Servusconnect. They are SERVUS Connect. They are a tool and a platform for property managers of multifamily, and they're really focused on the turnaround time of units. So they looked at the problem and said, you're working with all of these different service providers and it takes months to turn around a unit, and that's lost revenue. And so we worked with them on their intellectual property, which has like 5 different pieces to it. One is it's a lot about communication and making sure that everyone has the right information at the right time, and you're not chasing things down and saying, well, when was that last email sent? Is this project and that project management process to connecting all those dots. Another one is just reports and insight into all of that data. So if you're dealing with thousands of units across a couple dozen properties, then how do you keep track of all of that and make sure that you're hitting your NOI numbers and comparing that to other properties and industry standards and stuff. So that was like a particular process and a something that they were able to turn into intellectual property that they could turn around and sell to any property manager. So from a custom technology perspective, like they could use that internally for the one company that they work with, or they could turn around and sell it and see and treat it like a property investment and see return on investment in pretty predictable numbers in that way.
No, that's great. And with something like that, is it something that you guys plug into? And I'm going to use a code that I've heard. I think API, is that the thing where you can plug into the back end of a host kind of a database or something like that, or do you create, ground up, or help me out
Yeah,
understand that?
yeah, it's a great question. So you could take the fully custom route where you build everything from scratch. We don't recommend that, especially like thinking about the viability and how do you get to market. Um, you can rely on APIs. So for example, if you want to build a payment processor, there are tons of payment processors out there that you could just integrate with to handle all of that recurring payments and subscriptions and tenant payment portals and all that kind of stuff. So you don't need to build all of that from scratch and talk directly to a bank and say, hey, when I send this data to you, you have to do this in that manner. That would be way too complicated and take way too much time. So we get to stand on the shoulders of other giants and really take shortcuts when it makes sense. So custom software can exist pretty much anytime you're using a spreadsheet to track data. You could then turn that into a database and then start connecting it to other systems. So Servusconnect, as an example, was able to connect to MRI and I think Yardi and a couple other systems that already existed with some of their customers, and really see the benefits so that their property managers didn't have to train on a whole new system, but just got the benefits of their quick turnaround times.
Got it. And just in my world of insurance and stuff, I know we have like these database different programs. There's a couple platforms that are probably market leaders kind of thing, and I think I know one has more of a mindset of an open. Uh, and again, I'm going to use the words that I think of these things, and if they don't make sense, please help me define them. But kind of more of an open one where they allow kind of the outside vendors to plug in, or the API patch to come in and work with their program. And then there's others that basically say, no, we've got that built in our program. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that aspect as far as when faced with that option, is there a way a consumer, when they're looking at purchasing a system, it would be beneficial for them to look at it as opposed to buy the one that has everything that does things marginally, or buy the one that you can plug in these other custom pieces that are really rich and can, run fast kind of thing?
Yeah, there were a couple of great questions in there. First, as a consumer of software, it's a very different mindset than I'm going to go and create custom software. Um, it's in the real estate world, the best kind of um, uh, example of that would be, I want to develop new property and turn this farmland into a new skyrise, versus there's a property that already exists and I just want to flip it and think that um, the returns on that in a couple of years are going to be great. So those two strategies in the software product world are building new software from scratch and acquiring another piece of software. So there's also just buying off the shelf software that you talked about. And each of those take a whole different set of skills to do, and fit into your organization or just your process and practice as an individual operator in very different ways. So, like if you're going to buy software, you have to be really good in order to be successful at it, at evaluating and seeing how this fits into your process and then integrating that to your process overall. Whereas if you build custom software, you have a lot more skills of we need to be able to like support that software long term, because you don't have another company to kind of fall back on and rely on. I have a talk that I gave and some slides that I'd be happy to share, really diving into 4 of those strategies and how product companies think about them in different ways, and a bunch of examples there. But to your second question on uh, when you're evaluating off the shelf software, you made this really good distinction between um, a single software that does 50 different things and does them all sort of okay, versus um, this open mindset where you can plug data and systems together to really get and customize through integrations through those APIs what you want out of it. Um, a, a, a more general example that everyone's probably familiar with is the iPhone, in that the iPhone comes with Apple's default ecosystem and their apps that they have, but you can download Google apps and you can download Microsoft apps and install it and customize it. And it's that platform approach. And then all your apps can, or sometimes can't, talk to each other in that ecosystem. And so you could do the same thing with your operational software, or your CRM or your sales software, that you can have some that are really specialized and are totally lock you in, as opposed to some that open that data and allow you to integrate with all these different tools. So we would definitely recommend the latter of being really specialized tools that allow you to or fit your process overall really well, versus something that does everything kind of mediocre.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I was involved in a little bit of a review of some different things, and having been one that tried to use some of these custom softwares and recognizing, a rich platform versus just a, you know, very basic platform, and um, the capabilities. It was very clear to me the benefit of one that had kind of a dedicated, um, product development, service, et cetera, to that specific piece, as opposed to one that was going to say, no, we have all that, and it's just one of many things that it does. Um, to me, it was night and day, but I don't know that it made the same impression on others if you haven't used it or haven't had the opportunity to um, be involved at a level that you can distinguish between the difference. And based on that, I'm kind of curious if you can speak to um, you mentioned what do we call it, Servusconnect. I'm assuming they were doing something different before they came to you, and you guys were able to help them. Can you describe what the listeners, what are some of the tells that they may have an opportunity to, that life could get better if they were to consider custom software?
Great question. So I already mentioned if you have a spreadsheet, that's a good opportunity to turn it into a database. That doesn't mean every single spreadsheet you have should be a big application. But when we work with larger organizations looking to adopt and build custom software, that's one thing we really look heavily into, is that if they're using spreadsheets for reporting, or they have these cases where they always seem to have the old outdated spreadsheet and can't find the information that they're looking for. So that's a really good tell for, hey, is there something that I'm doing that I'm already organizing in one way and I've already tried to solve, but it's just not, it doesn't have the full capability. Like I can't access my spreadsheets when I'm on my mobile device and in the field. We like to do competitor research a lot as well. So looking at the market, two other main benefits of software are the speed in which automation and computers can move compared to people, and the standardization that comes with computers over people. So, for example, if you look at what some of those Redfin and Zillow are doing in the residential real estate markets, they can actually predict, based on data that they have, of when they think properties are going to come on the market. And so if you were to sit down and do that manually as a person, that could take a long time to do. You have to collect all the data, put them into spreadsheets, but they're able to write that equation once and then have a computer compute that over the entire United States. And so they're able to get the speed benefit of not just running those computations and figuring out what properties are there, but then doing that on a recurring basis. So they're able to every day or every hour, sometimes every minute, run some really complex algorithms and equations to pull out data and insights that we as individuals can't. So like having that advantage and seeing what advantages your competitors have, and not necessarily how they're doing it, but how do they get their benefits, we could then look at, is software potentially one way that they're doing it. The second thing I mentioned was standardization. And so if you're running that algorithm in one city or metro area, how do you then take that same equation and numbers and make sure you get that right across the entire United States? How do you do this email communication process and make sure you hit all the check boxes in your checklist of all your due diligence on your property the exact same way every single time? Computers are a lot better at that than us as people. We tend to skip steps and do them out of order, and causes slowdowns and problems and lost revenue. So I think looking for those opportunities, what we found, I think, in our experience, is that everyone has ideas, and we can take those ideas and help them say, yes, we've seen that in this other case, and here's how they did it. Here's what it would look like if you were to do that too.
No, you mentioned the ideas. I love that quote about, ideas are worthless. It's the execution. It's like it's everybody has an idea, but it's executing on it, kind of thing. So like you said, if it's share an idea and you say, yeah, that can be, or it can't be, or it's already done, or kind of thing. That's kind of a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Well, I love the fact that you keep bringing back to the spreadsheet. I mean, it basically, if I a little bit I understand about this, basically it's a field match kind of a thing. If I've got the data in the existing platform, and we've got name and address and phone number and you know, whatever those parameters are, what are those data points I'm collecting, you have the capability then to massage or utilize that data in a custom application that can produce the desired outcome. Um, and also, I like the point you made about the multiple platforms. You know, if you're out in the field on your cell phone, that kind
Hmm.
of thing. Um, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to like the sweet spot as far as a customer, as far as, you know, when is it that they might want to consider, um, you know, I guess getting a custom app kind of thing. Is it, can you point to like a sales volume, an employee count, number of locations? Is there just a repetitive task that you do over and over again that, um, you know, is there something along those lines that you can kind of speak to, that where you've seen historically people get to a point and either they're stuck and that this is something that can really propel them?
Great, great point. I don't think we look at any one metric. We kind of treat each case on a case by case basis and do some evaluation. It's not just the big idea and the gains that can come from it. It's we do that for every single little decision. So we break a product up overall into very specific functions and features and say, does it make sense, or how much does it make sense to spend on this effort for this one particular feature of getting these one fields into play, or generating this one report, or sending this one notification or email, or this one connection to this other system. And so um, the cases where it has worked, and has worked well, are a couple. One is when an organization is large enough to just adopt the software themselves. We see that around starting at around 50 employees, maybe 10 to 20 million in revenue a year, at the lower end of, I want to develop custom software just to use in house. Um, and that's not go out and sell it to anybody else. What technology has also done, though, is it's a really low barrier to entry for startups. And we see people with just an idea, um, that don't really know how they're going to sell it. They don't know how to market it. They might have done a little bit of market research and understand like the total value of the software, but that's all dependent on if they can solve that problem. Like you mentioned, ideas are worthless, execution is key. That still requires like tons of steps to get to that execution point. And so we have a couple of processes, and speaking as a product person, um, we do a lot of customer development. So there's product development, and then there's the customer development, which is not just marketing and sales, but understanding like what are the niches that you're going after, what is your go-to-market strategy, and how do you communicate, and how do you position this product, and um, all those kinds of facets on um, how you define a market and stuff. So from that approach, there are ways to take really small bets and risks to say, here's a hypothesis that I have, and kind of rely on the scientific method, and say, I'm going to go test this one thing and see if someone else is willing to pay X amount of dollars for it. And if they're willing to pay $5 a month for this mobile app concept, if I can solve that solution, then here's what that looks like at a different scale. And so you can kind of do some predictive stuff just with an idea without ever actually going and building and investing that. And investors who like to invest in software really look for that customer development piece, even if that is not revenue today or revenue in the 3 to 5 years, because they are looking for flipping their shares from an investment standpoint and saying, well, it grew in valuation, even if it didn't grow in bottom line revenue. So there's a lot of things that you can do before you actually have a valuable product at the end of the day that's returning value from a startup and software as a service perspective. So if you think of like, to give an example for all that, like Facebook is the mega example where they didn't start making revenue until they got into advertisement. And so they captured everyone's eyeballs and said, like, you as all the users and people are the product that we're selling to advertisers. And so their entire focus and mission was just, how do we get everyone using the platform, and then we'll worry about making money off of it later. A non-social kind of creepy example to that would be, how can let's say in real estate, we worked with another company who was looking to get bids on upfitting or kind of any kind of property management project that needs to be done. So I need to repair this wall. How do I go out and get bids from 5 service providers or something like that at the same time? And how do I make that as easy as possible for the property manager? Before they built any software, they went out and got 5 service providers to show up for a property manager. And they said, here's how I did all that. Here's all that manual process. How much is that worth to that property manager for me having done all that for them? Is that worth $100? Is it worth $500? Is it worth $20? And then they were able to say, okay, if I can shorten that down to this investment, and if I can figure out how to capture all those service providers later, like an Angie's List or something like that, then I can deliver this value and I can earn this much money and charge this much for this software application in this process. And so they're building that company in that entire investment cycle before they're actually automating that process and building that product. So it's the customer development side that kind of skips over and hides the product development side behind it.
No, it's kind of fascinating. I mean, just the the long-term view you have to have of this, to really, in many cases, make it some sort of a larger scale viable product. I'm curious on some of the projects you've done. Even if we stay with kind of like the Servusconnect, what kind of time did it take to develop the product, and then how many iterations were involved before you got to the the one that got deployed?
Great question. So we take a very extreme approach, I would say, to software development compared to most other people. So along those lines of thinking of viability, we really like to put products in the hands of users as quickly as possible. So we like to say and shoot for, we can get a working software product in someone's hands in 2 to 4 weeks. And so that's not the final end all product. You brought up the good point of iterations, and um, uh, of release, I think is where the fuzzy line is, in that when developing software, you want to release to actual users of the software instead of just a board of people that look at it and say, huh, it looks good. You want to start getting that actual value out of it as quickly as possible. So it's like if you were building a building and you just said, here's a roof, here's some walls, go live in it. Does that give you the shelter that you need? Yes. And they came back and they said, well, I'm in Alaska, and so I need a heater. As opposed to if you gave that to someone that's in Hawaii, they said, oh, I'm in Hawaii, I need some AC. It's too hot here. So getting that feedback as opposed to saying, oh, I'm just going to build out a whole HVAC system and spend a lot of time like giving all the bells and whistles and everything to it. If you do it in that iterative fashion, if you release and wait to hear what your actual customers and your actual users are saying about the product, you end up with the actual product that the users need and the value that they see, and then they're willing to pay a lot more for that.
Got it. On kind of a product question. I don't know about a product question, but just more of interacting with the client. And I'm not talking about your client, but I'm talking the client's end user
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to something in-house, something that's interfacing with their customer. Um, is there any kind of rule of thumb as far as, at what point that you're going to frustrate the client, or how many questions can you ask, or how many steps can you take before you need to interact with a human?
Mm. Before you need to interact with a human, are you saying like if you are
Well, just like
poking?
like a lot of times, like a website. You go to a
Right.
website and there's information. You get the information, and I feel like even like these phone things where you call in and they
Yeah.
uh, please press 1 for this or 2 for that. I think you said this. Is that, just
Hmm.
on and on and on. And then finally, this is a personal thing. I'll admit to it. I am so frustrated by the time the person gets on the phone
Hmm.
that I almost feel like I'm venting at them. Like, I was happy when I started the call, but by the time a person gets involved, I'm so pissed, that and the poor person that's answering the phone is, they're not excited about taking my call either.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think everyone experiences that. So I hate those dial systems. There's a really cool service online that'll say like, I think it's called Human Now or something like that, where it'll actually sit through all those chains for you and find the right person and then call you when they get on the line finally or something like that. So
Sign me up.
I
So,
think I think it really depends on the interaction or the experience that that end user is expecting. So on a phone, I expect to call a human. I expect to be able to talk to a human. I'm not going to pick up the phone and call somebody and want to talk to a machine. That's never my intention. Um, if I'm on a computer or on a website and I'm like self-service, just viewing information, I intentionally don't want to talk to a human. So I personally hate like those little sales chat bots that pop up all the time on websites now, because I'm like, no, I want to browse information kind of at my own pace. I don't want a salesperson in my face. Like that's a different experience. Have you seen Wreck-It Ralph, Breaks the Internet, that movie by any chance?
is that the cartoon one, or I can't remember? There's a couple
Yeah,
of different ones.
it was this Disney one where the old school video game character Wreck-It Ralph goes online and like they have pop-up people that come around and like shove pop-up signs in his face and stuff like that. And it's just like that's not the experience that you're looking for in that environment.
Yeah, no,
So
I feel like that, you'd mentioned about in the very beginning how you went from working for a big company as opposed to wanting to get closer to the problem. And I was going like, kind of right on, because that's, I feel like that whole big screen that's just like, and it's just collecting data, you know,
mhm.
and anyway.
So I think from that perspective, like happens all the time dealing with internet service providers, AT&T, and have to talk to this person and that person. And it's all indicative of these like large organizations that think everything needs to be siloed. But if you look at what Amazon does, for example, their support people, the one person you can contact right away can handle your entire issue. They don't need to transfer you off to somebody else. They have full autonomy to do everything to your account and your order. And I think that that's one of the competitive advantages that they have. From how they structure their organization, they have the mantra of customer first and like not whatever the customer says is correct, but they're the most important entity. So internally, like their product teams, the people, the really intelligent people that are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in salary, all work together on a single product that's customer centric and customer focused, as opposed to being siloed and divided where, oh, well, I only focus on the development and the technical, how it works, and I have to throw it over to someone else in marketing for that person to figure out how to market it and sell it. So
That's like specialization gone wrong, you know.
absolutely. And I think we just naturally, like even in smaller organizations, we naturally like divide up, and I wear a lot of hats at our company. We're only 5 people. And so there's a lot that we don't have a specialized person for. And switching and like context switching between all of that is just incredibly difficult sometimes. And so um, being able to uh, come at it from the perspective of these are different things and how do I need to operate on different perspectives, it helps to have um, outside help. So like we rely on advisors and mentors and other consultants to come in and say, hey, we need a new fresh set of eyes on this problem, because we have way too many hats on at the same time. So I think you get kinds of problems all the time, no matter what size of organization you're at. But um, yeah.
Got it. Um, Help me understand kind of a budget. You identified kind of somebody's got 50 employees and 10 plus million in sales is kind of like a point where you've seen, you know, things. Actually, I guess that's kind of like a point where it sounds like it's recognizable that there's a good viability there. Um, what what kind of a budget, if somebody's got an idea to see it through, and what should they expect to spend on something like that, or just ballpark? I mean, obviously you can't give me a price list here, but I'm just trying to, kind of curious on what what it, and I'm assuming that your conversation kind of lays out kind of a from beginning to kind of a development kind of a thing, or am I overthinking that?
No, I think you're right on. Unfortunately, the sky is the limit, quite literally. If you look at what really successful and large software companies do, they spend millions and millions of dollars on software. So it's really hard to compare and say, I want that thing that they have. How much is that going to cost me?
Sure.
What we do is we kind of take the reverse approach and say, what is the value of this property? And then what is the least amount of work and money that we can spend to get to that value? So we frame it from the perspective of, I have this idea and I think it's worth millions and millions of dollars, but what is that first step? Like, what is that first thing of value that I need to find out to see if this idea is worth millions and millions of dollars? Or if I'm an existing company, um, and we have a business process in place, we like to do a quick analysis that says, this business process is costing me $100 a week to run. And so we can then turn that and say, okay, if we could solve this problem, you'll break even at this point and you'll start returning additional revenue at another point. And so doing that ROI analysis is more of that business analysis side, and kind of requires a good understanding. And of course it's future telling and all that kind of stuff. But uh, to answer your question, um, you can start with custom software at like 5 to 10 grand is kind of what we've seen, in that you can integrate two tools that already exist and move data from one point to another, and that technically is custom software. um, if you want to build like the next $1 million company, you can definitely expect to spend millions of dollars to get to that point. but how do you do it in a way that makes sense, and how do you um, realize that value sooner rather than later, so you're not just sinking money into a sinking ship? So um, looking at it from that perspective, um, like some of the most successful really early stage products that we've seen, and products for businesses, are between like 50 and 250 $1,000. So there are tons of other ways that you can go about that, and it really depends on the value that you're looking for. So like, you don't want to spend 250 grand if you're talking about, hey, I'll only get 10 grand in value in return. So
Yeah, no, I, I appreciate that, but I think just even have some sort of a sense of what kind of initial, starting point. I mean, $5,000 to $10,000. If you've got a big enough problem and you're, constantly banging your head against a wall, and there's a better way, and just to engage in a conversation and recognize, or and kind of air it out. Does this make sense? Is this something that can be done? And get some sort of like a, like you said, in a few weeks, have some sort of uh, a very basic working model to see if it's got potential. I think that's encouraging, as opposed to, oh boy, years and millions of dollars, and
yeah.
good luck with that.
I
Um,
think that there are also a lot of other options that are out there. And I'm totally biased as a programmer, but I think that software is eating the world, and every company in the future that's going to be competing in the market is going to have software behind them, and custom software behind them. So just like you have people that do work, I think software is a brand new leverage of creating value, just like real estate and land. So um, it's kind of like this fourth new pillar of capital, land, people, and software. So I think it's definitely driving. It's a driving force on how to get returns. So
Question: Who owns the software? If I hire you to come in and develop it, is it my product or is that your product?
it's our clients, so we don't own any of the software. We've had a few conversations with clients who see the initial value for themselves and like their larger organizations that aren't software based. So we're in a couple of industries, real estate being one. But excuse me, from an ownership perspective, uh, it gives you two advantages. One, it gives you the control of what to build, and two, it gives you the ability to turn around and sell it to somebody else, and to scale it and take it from there. With custom software, you can pretty much always expect to continuously build on top of it. And so as our clients, like we work with a lot of our clients to build their own software development teams and help them hire people. And so that there's a lot of training and understanding and perspective that goes into that, as opposed to, I'm just going to build this and let it sit on the shelf kind of thing. But um, yeah.
Yeah, no, updates seem to be a necessary thing. I remember back in the day, I didn't quite understand that, and continually was frustrated with the software. But keeping it updated is definitely the one of the keys to making it work long term. I get
You
it.
sound really versed on this. Have you built custom software, and do you have?
Well, I've had some conversations with
Hmm,
different people about. I've had some ideas. I would say that.
nice.
So
Yeah.
I've and that's been about as far as it's gotten. It's been kind of a viability um, standpoint. It's like a problem I have, but nobody else seems to care, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, well, we'll continue going the ho hum way,
Hmm.
But um, yeah, there are. I mean, in insurance, there's just data collection. You know,
Hmm.
um, I was talking with somebody the other day about this. How I think what's interesting to me is to see how we are finally at the point where data is actually really being understood.
Hmm.
And I mean, data science is actually, you can see it. You can see how it moves things, as opposed to just continuing to fill out forms and gather information, and nobody knows why we're collecting the information. And I think in the beginning it was because we could collect the data that we did, whereas now I think there's some method to the madness behind it. So, but no, to answer your question, no, I've not. I have had a conversation, and that's kind of about as far as I got. So I'm familiar with it up to this point. So.
No, that's great. I think you definitely have a lot more knowledge than other people, and that's shown through. We've had some conversations on the insurance side, specifically around risk analysis. So I won't name them, but we were talking to another real estate company that has a competitive advantage in that they're able to come in and look at a property, and even though they charge a premium for their property management side, they're able to compare that property and a energy operational expense per square foot number to industry standards in a region. And so however we can streamline that process and make it a lot faster, um, and do that quick risk analysis on a property, they could turn around to their customers and say, you're currently spending 250 a square foot over the course of a month or a year. How do um, how does it sound if we can drop that down to 150 or $2 even, and you just pay us a little bit premium, we'll come in and tweak HVAC systems, and it's a win-win for both of us, kind of thing. So being able to do that analysis and rely on that data that you're talking about, I think is incredibly important, and we've seen some awesome gains from that.
No, I love. I mean, like I said, disrupting the status quo and actually using it, and having some mutual benefit. I think that's kind of the missing piece. A lot of it's been just like a matter of answering a lot of questions with no benefit being provided. But like what you're describing, there's clearly, there's a benefit on both sides, which is basically the uh, definition of commerce. I mean, there's
Yep.
a quid pro quo kind of a thing. There's a little bit for me, a little bit for you, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely.
So, hey Dan, if we could, I'd like to shift gears.
Sure.
Mentioned to you before we started. By day, I'm an insurance broker, and as such, we deal with risk management on a daily basis. And there's a couple of different strategies we employ. Um, and the first is we ask, is there a way we can avoid the risk? If we find that that's not possible, then we ask, is there a way we can minimize the risk? And if we can't avoid it, we can't minimize it, then we look to transfer it. And we do that through an insurance policy. And that's essentially what an insurance policy is a risk transfer vehicle. And so I like to ask my guest if they can take a look at their business, and if they can look at it from the lens of a real estate kind of an angle, that's great. But I'd like to ask you the question of what you consider to be the biggest risk. And just to make it clear, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer,
Mm-hmm.
but just more on just a broad view of risk.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'd like to ask you, Dan Moore, what is the biggest risk?
I think the biggest risk for all of us in our personal professional lives is speed. Time is a very limited resource for us all. Time is how opportunities kind of come and go. If we talked a little bit earlier about being able to know if a property is going to go on the market before it does, being able to operate faster than the competition. Um, so I would definitely have to say speed, and the speed at which we can operate, the speed at which we can save our time and do passive investments, and um, be able to realize value faster, and see more opportunities and the right opportunities faster. So anything that we can do to be faster at what we do, and relying on computers is a good way to do that. So.
Got it. No, I love asking the question and the answers I've heard, and I appreciate you sharing that, because it's funny. Time is that um, one commodity. It's the one. I don't know what I'm trying to say. The one asset we have that is just it's a limited supply. And once it's gone, it's gone. So I get where you're coming from. Um, Dan, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, as we were talking about. But the best place is probably my website at vaporware.net. So that's VAPORWARE.net. And you can just reach me at Dan at vaporware.net. So I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear of the things you're trying to automate or the time you're trying to save, and your challenges in real estate and insurance.
Well, I'm sure we will be talking soon about that, because I'd love to get into that a little bit further with you. Dan, I want to say thanks for taking the time. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot, and hope we can do it again soon.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.